Welcome back to the Titanium Hangar. This is Mike. Today I want to talk to you about how G.I. Joe Classified really did revive vintage G.I. Joe collecting for a lot of reasons. For reasons that were good and reasons that are bad. As someone who's been pretty much collecting vintage G.I. Joe, what feels like forever, I actually sold off quite a bit in 2018, but Classified is a big part of what brought me back into collecting G.I. Joe. We're going to talk briefly about how that sort of translated over to people collecting vintage. We saw it in 2020, and we see it now in 2024. And also, we're going to look at some of these great reveals that they had today. I think that Classified's doing pretty good. Talk about this and more coming up. So starting out, when they launched the line of G.I. Joe Classified, it looked a little bit different than the original series, the original A Real American Hero vintage stuff, and some collectors loved it because they've been collecting Joe for a while, wanted it to look a little bit different, didn't want the same old thing, and some didn't like it because, like myself, I was out of the game for a while, getting back into it. I just kind of want the classic look, and that's what I wanted the most. Some of it had some classic look, but most of it, well, it was based on the video game Operation Blackout. The game itself was okay. I played it with my kids, but I don't even think I finished it. It wasn't the greatest game in the world. I actually think that I heard somewhere that it really wasn't even created as a G.I. Joe game. It was more or less just a stock game, and then they added some backgrounds and some sprites to make it look like G.I. Joe and branded it as G.I. Joe. So it didn't really feel like the whole thing was a Joe game start to finish. I think we have some Joe games coming up soon that should feel a little bit more like a G.I. Joe game. But still, it was an okay game, but a bit stylized. So the first reason that it got people excited and it more or less revived vintage collecting is because it had a presence at retail. It had a buzz that was going on out there. And it just reminded people about the greatest G.I. Joe is the greatest action figure toy line in history. And it reminded people of that. Collectors that were collecting other things. Myself, in 2020, I was working on Visionaries. There was like 12 figures, 4 vehicles. Boom, 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 get it done. I was working on Cops and Crooks. 19 figures, 9 vehicles, 29 figures, 9 vehicles, something like that. I mean, boom, boom, boom. Couple of months, few months, get that done. This G.I. Joe, on the other hand, is a beast. It's 13 years, 500 figures, 115 vehicles plus, something like that, plus all the recolor variations, and there's a lot to it, so it's a big beast. But G.I. Joe Classified reminds you that there's a lot of great characters and figures that are out there, and also reminds you of the brand. So it really hasn't been on the shelves very much prior to G.I. Joe Classified being out, and it's kind of on and off, hit and miss, but when there's a new movie out, it doesn't feel very classic with the packaging. So kind of goes back to the 2008, 2009, 2010. I think 11 was the last year of it. And that time frame was so much fun. I wished I would have just been a completionist with it back then, instead of picking and choosing a few here and there. When they're sub $5 price point, that was a whole lot of fun. G.I. Joe Classified was close. Still not as fun as that. But it was something at retail that you could get excited about again, and I did, and a lot of people did. But with many of the characters, the design did not hit the mark for collectors, especially myself and others that kind of view collecting the way I do. Some people loved it. I did not exactly love all the designs, and I wished for more of a retro style. But instead of waiting for retro, I just collected vintage. I think a lot of other people did too. Hasbro started reissuing the figures in a retro style. Now this is something that is a double-edged sword. Some people get upset because they would have rather have had the retro and wish they wouldn't have bought the first version. Some people were upset because it's just like you just keep putting out the same figure over and over and over. I'm fine with it because they're all a little bit different, but in all reality, I would like to just have a full 100% collection of just retro. That would be perfect for me. That's the way I collect. But with that, this is another reason that G.I. Joe Classified sort of revives vintage collecting, because people see this on the shelf. They see the vintage style packaging. They see the vintage style animation looking figures or toy-looking figures and matches Real American Hero, and it gets people excited about vintage again. It really is, and maybe it's a psychological thing, maybe it's an emotional thing, but it is a thing, and I love these retros. It's my favorite part about Classified, and I know other people feel the same way, and other people think, hey, what about those figures I did have back in the day? Why not collect those? Oh, price. Yes. The vintage stuff shot up in price in 2020, not because of Hasbro and their Classified, but because we had the COOF, or whatever you want to call what was going on that year without getting demonetized. You can't speak the truth. Then the problem was that there was too many dollars chasing the same product, and when it's vintage, it's more finite, and evidently the brand new Classified was even more finite, meaning that there was nothing there, very little there, and a lot of dollars chasing it. But the Viper was impossible to get, beyond impossible to get, and to buy one on the secondary market, you actually could get a vintage one cheaper. You could probably buy 2 vintage ones for the price of this. I know Beachheads were selling for $140, and you could go get a Beachhead for $30 or $40, vintage, complete, in pretty good shape on eBay. So that was a weird kind of situation that made me stop and evaluate, why am I buying this new stuff? You know, they're just going to repop it back out in a few years, and it'll come out even better. And why would I spend all this money chasing this down the secondary market? Let's chase down vintage on the secondary market. Now I got to get into the next point. They gave us some designs I didn't like. They've redesigned them, made them a little bit better. They've given us retro versions of those characters, and pretty much a lot of the characters. And a lot of the retro characters really didn't even need a retro version per se, because they already looked retro enough. But now they're finding sort of a sweet spot. I really feel like the Hasbro Classified G.I. Joe line has found this nice mix between already looking retro with the standard release, but giving it a modernized feel that doesn't look like you're making a Fortnite figure or you're going into some strange area. It's a nice mix of the two, which I think satisfies both collectors that want retro, super, not sort of super cartoon, but more toy, and others that want the realism. They've found a nice fine line between that, and with that, the new reveals that we saw, I mean, it really does show that they figured this line out. And with that, that is awesome, but it also, at the same time, if you just look at this dial tone, you can think, well, that looks so awesome, I kind of want to go get me a vintage one looking at it, because it looks so good, it looks so close to vintage, still not vintage. And now with the $25 price point, I actually bought a complete dial tone for less than $20 because I needed the stupid little antenna, the microphone piece. But anyhow, this is still looking fantastic and amazing. They really have figured out the secret here. And actually, I didn't have all my Cobra troops together when they announced the Saw Viper. I didn't even know what a Saw Viper was. And I gotta say that this is a very good classic homage to the Saw Viper with a very good update. So I think they've done a fantastic job with the Saw Viper, and with that, they've included things that are necessities that you need to include that the vintage figures had, like the ammo belts. This is a weird time frame where they did ammo belts, and the only real annoying thing about ammo belts is if you're missing them off your vintage figure, but it seems like it'd be a whole lot of fun with ammo belts on your Classified figures. I think they did a good job with Starduster too, and they're educating us. I didn't know Starduster was included in the cereal boxes. I wasn't collecting Joe when Starduster came out, Buster, and I think the colors look right. I mean, we all know this is just reused parts, which is fine, and that's what they did back in the day. And they're giving us a new figure, a new character. But I have to say that I've noticed a vintage collecting anomaly. So something like Starduster, that is rare and expensive and hard to get, and the Steel Brigade figures, rare, expensive, hard to get, they don't sell extremely well in the Classified line. And this was not hard to get at all. It's an exclusive. They did make it $35, which I felt was expensive. But it was still available. It's probably still available right now. I actually forgot about it. When I got home, I was like, oh, it's still up. Let me go and order mine. No big deal. Free shipping. And with that, it's an interesting anomaly that vintage collectors will pay in the hundreds for a good Starduster that's vintage, but the modern version that looks really good too, it's not as popular. Leatherneck looks really good. I mean, I think they've nailed the figure, they've nailed the character, and it's one of those things, like, with every figure they've shown today, aside from Xandar, then I'm not sure how they really improve it making a retro version. I mean, just take the same exact figure, pop it in a retro box, and it would still work. I think they've done that well with these, and it still has a modern flair. It's not like it's completely just the vintage figure scaled up, doubled the size, 2 up, and then put in a package. It is very modernized in a way with the modern, I'd say, articulation and the modern look and feel. But it does have that classic feel at the same time. And that's the sweet spot, and they pulled it off really well. Back to the Xandar, I feel like the bright blues of the vintage are muted now. So we've got muted blues, which actually feels like it works. They went out of their way to match the handkerchief to the shirt of Zorana, so that it's kind of a thing, I guess, which I never knew as a kid, and I just found that out when they talked about it their last live stream. But I could see them doing a retro version of this, possibly with a brighter blue, and especially on the backpack and a more classic backpack, and they could do that. I could see that. But I still think it looks good. I mean, I don't really have any complaints about it, and it feels great. I think Zorana's a great figure. Aside from people having the arm fall off, I think it's a pretty cool looking figure. So the Dreadnought team is being dialed out really well. Now, I'm not a fan of the sniper, and I know some people are. There's a female sniper. It's pretty cool. It is a cool figure. It is. But not something I'm super interested in myself. And that's because I kind of just want classic figures that I've had from back in the day. And this is kind of a side project, an offshoot. And I don't know if they produce these in lower quantities, which I would assume they would because they're higher price point. So lower production quantities at the higher price point. But they pack in a bunch of stuff that personally I would never want or use or need. But I want to point something out in this picture, and if you look on the right, the lower section, the guns that come with it are very, very reminiscent of a lot of the 90s guns. And well, throughout the 90s reused 80s guns too. So that's just the weapon tree, the accessory tree was loaded up with guns that looked a lot like this. And so that's kind of a retro thing, but none of them really color like this. These have more paint apps, and then of course that's just a small bit of what you get in this. So you do sort of get your money's worth if you look at the whole package here, but still not for me. So we're getting Law and Order, and I'm guessing these are both going to be deluxe. I don't know all the information just yet on this. I just grabbed the shots and going forward. These are the render-only reveals that they put out, and Law and Order looking good. Feels about right. I mean, just like I said, vintage styling with a modern flair and a modern update, and probably a $35 price point. Well, maybe $45 because the dog's gonna make it $45. So still pretty cool. Law and Order, definitely classic characters that we would want. Put them next to your Jinx. But we are getting a heavy duty, which if you think about it, the vintage toy is really cool and has a very similar type of accessory that they've got for this figure. And it had a kind of a transparent scope. They do include a scope. It's not just transparent red though. It is probably going to look a little cooler and more high-tech than what came with the original vintage figure. And you get a whole bunch of missile firing accessories, things that'll look pretty good set up. Now I'm wondering if this is going to fit into the $35 price category. So $45 with an animal, and then $35 with this, and still pretty cool. I think they pulled it off really well, and again, it's very retro feeling with a bit of a modernized flair. But I mean, I'm liking it because I think it's even leaning more retro than a lot of the other ones, but really cool looking overall. So, pretty good day of reveals from Hasbro for their classified line. I do feel like classified in 2024, a lot of people are jumping back into collecting vintage for all the reasons that I said. They're reminded about the line, they're reminded about the vintage, and the retro inspired looks are getting people excited about vintage figures again. I'm seeing it from so many people all over the place, but I'm curious, what do you guys think? What do you think about these reveals? What do you think about vintage collecting? And do you kind of feel like you're getting back into collecting vintage G.I. Joe? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and Tiger Hanger out.